The coffee machine hissed for what felt like the 100th time that afternoon. Rachel wiped her hands on her apron and glanced at the clock above the kitchen door. 3:30. Just 2 more hours until her shift ended, and then she could finally go home, kick off these terrible shoes, and maybe practice for an hour before exhaustion pulled her into sleep. She grabbed the coffee pot and made her rounds through the dining room of Antonio's Italian restaurant. Table 5 needed refills. Table 7 wanted extra Parmesan. Table 3 had been nursing the same glass of water for 40 minutes, clearly killing time before an appointment somewhere. Rachel smiled at each of them, her face muscles trained into professional pleasantness after years of practice. 28 years old, and this was her life. Serving breadsticks and taking orders for chicken Parmesan. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Rachel carried a tray of dirty dishes back to the kitchen, her mind drifting to the piano sitting in her cramped apartment across town. She hadn't played in 3 days. Between double shifts and pure exhaustion, she barely had the energy to look at it anymore. The beautiful upright piano that had once been her whole world now served mostly as a flat surface for stacking mail and empty coffee mugs. There was a time when music had been everything. She'd spent her childhood at that piano, practicing scales while other kids played outside. Her teacher said she had something special, a gift that shouldn't be wasted. Her parents scraped together money they didn't have to send her to the conservatory, that prestigious music school in the city where talented kids went to become the next generation of concert pianists. She'd graduated with honors, top of her class. Her final recital had people on their feet, applauding until their hands hurt. The future looked bright, sparkling with possibility. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of audition rejections. 6 years of watching younger musicians get the opportunities she'd dreamed about. 6 years of her savings account draining away while rent kept climbing and student loans kept demanding payment. The reality of being a classical musician in a world that didn't value classical music hit her like a freight train. So she'd done what she had to do. She'd gotten a survival job. Just temporary, she'd told herself. Just until something breaks through. Just until the right audition comes along. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're not paying attention. Rachel. Table 9 needs their check, Antonio called from behind the bar. He was the owner, a gruff man in his 60s who ran the restaurant like a ship captain. Fair enough, but not particularly warm. She printed the check and delivered it with another practiced smile. The couple at table 9 left her a decent tip, at least. Small blessings. The afternoon shift dragged on. A birthday party came in. 12 people who rearranged all the tables and wanted separate checks. A businessman sat alone with his laptop, ordering nothing but soup and taking up a foretop during what should have been prime seating time. A family with 2 small children left spaghetti sauce everywhere. This was the reality, not concert halls and thunderous applause, not beautiful evening gowns and elegant piano benches. Just sore feet, demanding customers, and the constant smell of garlic bread that never quite washed out of her clothes. Finally, 5 o'clock arrived. Rachel clocked out and grabbed her jacket from the back. She was halfway to the door when Antonio called her back. "Hey, tomorrow night I need you to come in early," he said, barely looking up from his paperwork. "We've got a big private event. Wedding anniversary party." Rented out the whole place, Rachel's heart sank. "How early?" 4 o'clock. "It's going to be a long night. Big tips, though. Rich people." She nodded, too tired to argue. There went her plan to practice tomorrow afternoon. There went her plan to maybe finally record that audition tape she'd been putting off for months. The subway ride home was packed with evening commuters. Rachel stood squeezed between a man with a briefcase and a teenager with headphones blasting music so loud she could hear every beat. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine she was somewhere else. Anywhere else. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Tiny. Cluttered. The kind of place you rent when it's all you can afford in a city where everything costs too much. But it had one thing that mattered. In the corner near the window sat her piano. She dropped her bag and went straight to it, not even bothering to change out of her uniform first. Her fingers found the keys like coming home. She started with scales, warming up muscles that had gone stiff from 3 days of neglect. Then she moved into a piece she'd loved since childhood. Nothing fancy. Just something that made her feel like herself again. For 20 minutes, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't someone struggling to pay bills or wondering if she'd made terrible life choices. She was just a musician, lost in the thing she loved most in the world. But then her hands started cramping. Her back ached from hunching over trays all day. The exhaustion that she'd been pushing away came flooding back. She couldn't even finish the piece. Rachel stood up and looked at the piano with something close to anger. What was the point? She was fooling herself, wasn't she? Pretending that somehow, some way, this would all turn into the career she'd dreamed about. She was 28 years old, serving pasta to pay rent, with a degree that had cost a fortune and seemed to be worth nothing in the real world. Maybe it was time to give up. Maybe it was time to accept that some dreams just don't come true, no matter how hard you work or how much talent you have. Maybe she should sell the piano, get a better apartment, stop torturing herself with this fantasy that belonged to a younger version of herself who didn't know any better. She made a simple dinner and ate it standing at the counter. Then she fell into bed still wearing her socks and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be another long day. Another shift of smiling and serving and pretending everything was fine. Another evening of watching other people celebrate their lives while she brought them wine and cleared their plates. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow, that private event at the restaurant would become the night that split her life into before and after. But right now, lying in her small apartment with aching feet and fading dreams, Rachel had no way of knowing that her moment was coming. She just knew that she was tired. Tired of struggling, tired of hoping, tired of being invisible. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep while across town a beautiful grand piano was being delivered to Antonio's restaurant for the party. The same piano that would soon change everything. Rachel arrived at the restaurant at 4 o'clock sharp, just like Antonio had asked. The place looked completely different. White tablecloths covered every surface. Candles flickered in glass holders. Flowers decorated the center of each table. Someone had even dimmed the usual harsh lighting, making everything look softer, more elegant, and there, in the corner near the window, sat the most beautiful piano Rachel had ever seen outside of a concert hall. It was a grand piano. Not just any grand piano, but a massive gleaming black Steinway that looked like it cost more than she'd earned in 5 years of serving pasta. The lid was propped open, revealing the pristine strings inside. Even from across the room she could tell it was an incredible instrument. Her fingers tingled just looking at it. Gorgeous, right? Said Vincent, one of the other servers, coming up beside her. They had it delivered this morning. Took 6 guys to get it through the door. It's for some professional pianist they hired for tonight. Rachel felt a familiar ache in her chest. Of course. Rich people having a party would hire a professional pianist, someone who'd actually made it, someone whose dreams had worked out. Stop standing around, Antonio barked. We've got 2 hours before guests arrive. Table settings need to be perfect. These people are paying me a fortune. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Rachel folded napkins into fancy shapes, polished wine glasses until they sparkled, and triple-checked that every fork and knife was positioned exactly right. The kitchen staff was preparing special dishes, things not even on the regular menu. This wasn't just any party. This was the kind of event that could make or break the restaurant's reputation. By 6 o'clock, everything was ready. The servers stood in a line near the kitchen wearing their best uniforms. Antonio had even made them all put on black bow ties for the occasion. Rachel felt ridiculous, but she kept her mouth shut. The guests started arriving right on time. They came in pairs and small groups, all dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Rachel's entire wardrobe. The women wore elegant dresses and expensive jewelry. The men had on tailored suits. Everyone seemed to know each other, greeting with hugs and air kisses and the kind of easy laughter that comes from never worrying about money. The couple celebrating their anniversary arrived last. They must have been in their 60s, both of them glowing with happiness. The woman wore a silver dress that caught the candlelight. The man had his arm around her waist, looking at her like she was the only person in the room. Rachel served champagne and appetizers, weaving between conversations about vacation homes and charity galas and investment portfolios. She was invisible to them, just another server in a bow tie. She'd learned years ago not to let it bother her. This was just how it was. But she kept glancing at that piano. 6:30 came and went. The guests were seated now, working on their first course. Conversations filled the air, mixing with the gentle clinking of glasses and silverware. But something was missing. There was no music. Rachel noticed Antonio checking his phone, his face growing more tense by the minute. He disappeared into the back office, then emerged looking angry and worried at the same time. He pulled Vincent aside and they had a hushed conversation. Vincent shook his head. Then Antonio moved on to the other servers, asking them something. They all shook their heads too. Rachel's stomach started to knot up. Something was wrong. Finally, Antonio made his way to her. His face was red and he had that look he got when things were falling apart. "The pianist isn't coming," he said, his voice tight. "Family emergency. Can't make it. Can't find a replacement on this short notice." Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came out. "These people paid me specifically for live music," Antonio continued, running his hand through his hair. "The whole theme of the night was supposed to be this piano performance. They're expecting it, and I've got nothing." He looked around desperately. "Does anyone here play? Anyone, even a little bit? Just enough to make some background noise?" The other servers avoided eye contact. Vincent shrugged helplessly. The kitchen staff peered out, but no one volunteered. Rachel's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were shaking. Every instinct told her to keep quiet, to stay invisible, to not risk embarrassing herself in front of all these people. But that piano was sitting there, that beautiful, perfect piano, and it was going to sit silent all night. Her hand went up, almost like it wasn't attached to her body, like someone else was controlling it. Antonio's eyes locked onto her. "You play?" Yes, I play." He looked skeptical. "How well?" "I need someone who can play real piano, not chopsticks." "I studied at the conservatory," Rachel said quietly. "I have a degree in classical piano performance." The other servers turned to stare at her. Vincent's mouth actually fell open. They'd worked together for 3 years and he'd had no idea. Antonio's expression shifted from skepticism to desperate hope. "You're serious? You can actually play that thing?" Rachel nodded, not trusting her voice anymore. Okay. Antonio was already pushing her toward the piano. "Just play something nice. Background music. Nothing too loud, nothing too complicated, just pleasant, make it sound professional." "Can you do that?" "I can try." "Don't try, do it. These people are expecting a show." Rachel walked toward the piano on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The guests barely noticed her. They were too busy with their meals and conversations. Just another staff member doing her job. She sat down on the bench and her breath caught. The piano was even more magnificent up close. The keys were perfect, not a scratch on them. She could smell the polish, could see her reflection in the glossy black surface. When was the last time she'd played an instrument like this? Years. Maybe not since her final recital at the conservatory. Her hands hovered over the keys. They were still shaking. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Antonio wanted background music. Something simple and unobtrusive. Something that wouldn't draw attention. She could do that. She'd start with something easy. Moon River, maybe. That was safe. Pretty but forgettable. The kind of thing people could talk over. The guests were still chatting, completely unaware. The anniversary couple was laughing at something, their faces warm in the candlelight. Servers moved quietly between tables. Life went on around her. Rachel placed her fingers on the keys, and something happened. The moment she felt those perfectly balanced keys under her fingertips, the moment she touched an instrument this fine after months of her mediocre upright piano at home, something inside her shifted. It was like a door opening, like waking up from a long sleep. This wasn't just any piano. This was the kind of instrument that responded to every tiny movement, every subtle pressure. This was the kind of piano she'd dreamed about playing. Her fingers pressed down, and the first notes of Moon River floated into the air. But they didn't sound simple. They didn't sound like background music. They sounded like coming home. The first few notes came out tentative, almost apologetic. Rachel told herself to keep it simple, keep it quiet, just play the melody and nothing more. Background music. That's what Antonio wanted. That's what she should give him. But her fingers had other ideas. They remembered things her mind had tried to forget. They remembered years of training, thousands of hours of practice, the feeling of losing herself completely in music. And this piano, this incredible instrument, was responding to every touch like it had been waiting for her. Without meaning to, she added a small flourish to the melody, just a tiny embellishment, a little harmonic variation that made the simple tune more interesting. Her left hand, which had been playing basic chords, started moving in more complex patterns. The piano sang under her fingers. That was the only way to describe it. Every note was crystal clear, every dynamic shift perfectly expressed. This wasn't like her old upright at home, where she had to fight the keys and compensate for dead spots in the sound. This piano wanted to make music. It was begging her to really play. A few people at the tables nearest to her paused their conversations, just for a moment, then went back to talking, but Rachel barely noticed. She was somewhere else now. The restaurant was fading away. The people, the tables, the candles, all of it was disappearing. There was only the piano and the music flowing through her. Moon River transitioned into something else. She didn't even consciously decide to change pieces. Her hands just moved, and suddenly she was playing a Chopin nocturne, one of her favorites from years ago. A piece she'd performed at her senior recital, back when she still believed her future was full of concert halls and standing ovations. The Chopin was harder, much harder. It required technical skill that most people spent years developing. But Rachel had spent years developing it. All those hours in practice rooms, all those sore fingers and aching backs, all that discipline and dedication, it was still there, waiting, dormant but not dead. Her right hand danced across the upper register while her left hand provided the rich, rolling accompaniment. The melody soared and dipped, whispered and sang. She shaped each phrase with the kind of musicality that can't be taught, only felt. More conversations stopped. A woman at table 4 set down her wine glass, her eyes turning toward the corner where Rachel sat. A man near the window leaned back in his chair, listening. The anniversary couple, in the middle of cutting their entrees, both looked up at the same time. Rachel didn't see any of it. Her eyes were closed now. She was inside the music, feeling every emotion she'd pushed down for the past 6 years pouring out through her fingertips. All the disappointment, all the rejection, all the nights she'd lain awake wondering if she'd wasted her life chasing an impossible dream. It was all there in the notes, but there was something else too. Hope. Stubborn, persistent hope that had somehow survived despite everything. The nocturne built to its gentle climax, the melody reaching upward like a question being asked. Then it settled back down, becoming softer, more intimate. Rachel's whole body swayed with the music, completely unself-conscious. This was who she really was. Not the tired waitress with sore feet and a fake smile. This person at the piano, lost in something beautiful. The piece ended with a soft, delicate flourish. Her hands lifted from the keys, and in that moment Rachel realized the restaurant had gone completely silent. She opened her eyes. Every single person was looking at her. The guests, the servers, even Antonio standing by the kitchen door with his mouth slightly open. Nobody was eating. Nobody was drinking. They were all just staring. Rachel's face went hot. Oh no. She'd done exactly what Antonio told her not to do. She'd drawn attention. She'd made it about her instead of keeping it in the background. She'd probably just gotten herself fired. But then someone started clapping. It was the anniversary woman, the one in the silver dress. She was applauding, and there were tears running down her face. Her husband joined in, then the person next to them, and suddenly the entire room erupted in applause. People were standing up. Actually standing up from their tables and clapping like they were at a concert. Some of them were wiping their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. Rachel sat frozen on the piano bench, her heart hammering, not understanding what was happening. That was incredible. The anniversary woman called out, walking toward her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" I studied at the conservatory," Rachel managed to say. "The conservatory?" A man from one of the other tables stood up too. "You're a professional pianist?" "Not exactly. I mean, I have a degree, but Rachel gestured helplessly at her server uniform and bow tie. "This is my job." The room went quiet again, but different this time. People were looking at her with something like wonder, or maybe confusion. How does someone who plays like that end up serving tables? "Play something else," someone called out. "Please." "Yes, please," the anniversary woman agreed. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. We were supposed to have a pianist tonight, but I'm so glad he canceled." This is so much better than anything we could have planned. Antonio caught Rachel's eye from across the room. He looked stunned, but he nodded at her. Keep going. Rachel turned back to the piano. Her hands were shaking even harder now, but for a different reason. These people wanted to hear her play, actually wanted it. Not as background noise, but as the main event. She took a breath and let her fingers find the keys again. This time, she didn't hold back at all. She launched into Rachmaninoff. A prelude that was technically demanding and emotionally powerful, the kind of piece that separates amateur players from serious musicians. It started with dramatic, crashing chords that filled the entire restaurant. Bold and declarative like an announcement. Like saying, here I am, this is what I can do, this is who I really am. The piano responded magnificently, handling the thunderous passages and delicate moments with equal grace. Rachel's fingers flew across the keys, her years of training taking over completely. She hit every note with precision, but more than that, she played with raw emotion that made the technical skill almost beside the point. This was anger and joy mixed together. This was 6 years of serving food when she should have been performing. This was every rejection letter, every disappointed phone call home, every moment she'd felt like giving up. But it was also every morning she'd woken up and chosen to keep trying. Every time she'd gone to her piano after a long shift, exhausted but unwilling to let it go completely. The music swelled and crashed like ocean waves. Some passages were so soft you could hear people holding their breath, afraid to make any sound that might interfere. Other moments shook the walls with their intensity. Rachel was vaguely aware that some people had their phones out, recording. But she didn't care anymore. Let them watch. Let them see what a waitress could do when given the chance. The piece built to its final climax, and Rachel put everything she had into it. Her entire body was engaged now, leaning into the fortissimo passages, pulling back for the softer moments. Every muscle, every breath, every ounce of herself was in this music, and then, one final chord, deep and resonant and final, her hands lifted. The last vibrations faded into silence. Rachel sat there, breathing hard, suddenly aware that her face was wet with tears. The silence lasted forever and no time at all. Rachel sat at the piano, her hands still trembling, tears streaming down her face, wondering what she'd just done. She'd completely lost control. She'd forgotten where she was, forgotten that she was supposed to be working, forgotten everything except the music. Then the applause started again. But this time it was different, louder, more intense. People weren't just clapping politely. They were cheering. Actually cheering. Like she'd just finished a performance at Carnegie Hall instead of playing in an Italian restaurant where she normally served breadsticks. The anniversary couple rushed over first. The woman was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. That was extraordinary, she said, gripping Rachel's hands. I've been to dozens of concerts, heard world-class musicians, but I've never felt anything like what you just did. Never. Her husband nodded, his own eyes wet. We've been married 40 years today. 40 years. And this right here, this is the most memorable moment of our entire celebration. Thank you. Really, truly thank you. Rachel didn't know what to say. She settled for, I'm so happy I could be part of your special night. But the couple wasn't moving away. Other guests were gathering around the piano now, all wanting to talk to her, to tell her how much the music had moved them. A woman in a red dress said she'd gotten chills. An older gentleman said it reminded him of his late mother who'd loved classical piano. A young couple said they'd recorded it and couldn't wait to watch it again. How long have you been performing? Someone asked. I'm not a performer, Rachel said automatically. I work here. I'm a server. But you have to perform, another woman insisted. With talent like that, you can't just be serving food. Rachel felt a lump forming in her throat. It's not that simple, she started to explain, but the words got stuck. A man in an expensive suit pushed through the small crowd. He was younger than most of the other guests, maybe in his mid-30s, with the kind of confidence that came from success. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, but I need to talk to you. My name is David Chen, I'm a music producer. Rachel's heart skipped. A music producer? I work in documentary production, specifically. We do a series about undiscovered talent in classical music, artists who deserve recognition but haven't gotten it yet. He pulled out a business card. What you just played, that's exactly what we're looking for. Not just technical skill, though you clearly have that, but authenticity, Real emotion. The kind of thing you can't fake. Rachel took the card with shaking hands. It looked official. Expensive cardstock, embossed lettering. This was real, I don't understand, she said. You want to make a documentary about me? I want to talk about the possibility, yes. We're always looking for stories like yours. Classically trained musicians who are working regular jobs, keeping their art alive despite everything. It's powerful stuff. People connect with it. He gestured around the room. I mean, look at what just happened here. Everyone's moved. Everyone's talking about you. That's the kind of impact we want to capture. Rachel couldn't finish the sentence. This felt like a dream. The kind she used to have after particularly long shifts where impossible things happened and then she'd wake up disappointed. Think about it, David said. No pressure. But call me. Let's have a conversation. Antonio appeared at her elbow, looking dazed. Rachel, I had no idea. 3 years you've worked for me and I had no idea you could do that. You never asked, Rachel said simply. He shook his head. I should have. I'm sorry. I should have asked a lot of things. He glanced at the guests, all still gathered around the piano. Tonight's on the house for you. And from now on, anytime you want time off to practice or audition or whatever you need, you let me know. Okay? Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The party continued, but everything had shifted. The guests kept coming up to her throughout the evening, sharing stories about music that meant something to them, asking questions about her training, her life. Several people asked if she gave lessons. 2 people wanted to know if she played at weddings. One woman said her daughter was getting married next summer and would Rachel consider performing. Vincent pulled her aside during a quiet moment. Why didn't you ever tell us, he asked. We've worked together for years. I guess I was embarrassed, Rachel admitted. Here I am with this fancy degree and I'm doing the same job as everyone else. It felt like admitting I'd failed. That wasn't failure, Vincent said, gesturing back toward the piano. That was incredible. You've been carrying that around inside you this whole time? I practice at home sometimes, but it's not the same. My piano isn't like that one. She looked at the Steinway, still gleaming in the candlelight. I'd almost forgotten what it feels like to play a real instrument. By the end of the night, Rachel's pockets were full of business cards. People who wanted her contact information, who wanted to hire her, who wanted to help somehow. The tips were generous too, far more than she'd make in a normal month. But the thing that kept running through her mind was David's card. A music producer, a documentary series, the possibility of being seen not as a waitress who could play piano but as a pianist. Period. When the last guest finally left, Rachel helped clean up in a daze. The other servers kept looking at her differently now. Not badly, just different, like they were seeing her clearly for the first time. She was putting chairs back when she noticed people at table 7 checking their phones and laughing. One of them called her over. You need to see this, the man said, turning his phone around. It was a video of her playing. One of the guests must have posted it online. Rachel watched herself at the piano, completely lost in the music, and barely recognized the person on the screen. That was her? She looked so focused, so alive, so completely in her element. It's already got 50,000 views, the woman next to him said. Posted 2 hours ago and it's going viral. Rachel felt dizzy. Viral? Look at the comments, another person added, showing their own phone. The comments were scrolling by faster than Rachel could read them. But she caught glimpses. Who is this woman? Why isn't she famous? This made me cry. I've listened 5 times already. The way she plays, you can feel every emotion. By the time Rachel left the restaurant that night, the video had over 200,000 views. Her phone, which she'd left in her locker during the shift, was full of notifications. Friend requests from strangers, messages from people she hadn't talked to in years, old classmates from the conservatory reaching out. Even one of her former teachers sending a message that just said, I always knew you had it in you. The subway ride home felt surreal. Rachel kept checking her phone, watching the numbers climb. 300,000 views, 400,000. Comments in languages she didn't even recognize. She thought about David's card in her pocket, about the documentary, about all the people who'd asked to hire her, about Antonio saying she could have time off whenever she needed. For 6 years she'd felt invisible, like she was sleepwalking through a life that wasn't really hers, like her dreams had died and she was just going through the motions until she figured out what came next. But tonight, For the first time since graduating, she'd felt like herself. Really, truly herself. And somehow, impossibly, people had seen her, really seen her. Her phone buzzed with another notification. The video had hit 500,000 views. Rachel looked at her reflection in the dark subway window. Same tired face, same server uniform, same person who'd woken up this morning dreading another shift. But something was different now. Something had cracked open inside her, letting light in. She pulled out David's business card and stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened her email and started typing. Rachel woke up the next morning to her phone buzzing nonstop. For a confused moment, she thought she'd overslept for her shift. Then she remembered. Last night. The piano, everything. She grabbed her phone and her breath caught. The video had over 2 million views now. 2 million. People from around the world were watching her play. The comments kept coming, thousands of them, from places she'd never been and probably would never go. But it wasn't just strangers. Her email inbox was flooded. David, the producer, had written back right away, eager to set up a meeting. 3 different concert venues had reached out asking about her availability. A wedding planner wanted to discuss booking her for events. Someone from her old conservatory had emailed saying they'd love to have her come speak to current students. And then there were the personal messages. Old friends she'd lost touch with. Family members she hadn't heard from in years. Her first piano teacher, Mrs. Peterson, who'd started giving her lessons when she was 7 years old. The message from Mrs. Peterson made Rachel cry all over again. I always knew you were special. I'm so proud of you. Don't let this moment pass you by. Don't let this moment pass you by. Rachel got out of bed and went straight to her piano. Not to practice anything specific, just to sit there and make sure last night had really happened, that she hadn't imagined the whole thing. Her fingers found the keys and she played a few bars of the Rachmaninoff piece from last night. On her old upright, it sounded different, thinner, less powerful. But it was still beautiful in its own way. And more importantly, it was still hers. This music, this gift, it had been here all along. She'd just stopped believing in it. The next few days moved fast. Too fast. Rachel met with David at a coffee shop downtown, and he laid out his vision for the documentary. They'd film her story, her daily life, her journey from conservatory graduate to server to this viral moment. They'd capture her practicing, performing, talking about what music meant to her. People need to see that talent doesn't always follow a straight line, David explained, that you can have all the training and skill in the world and still struggle. That's the real story. Not just that you can play beautifully, but that you kept going even when everything seemed impossible. Rachel signed the contract a week later. The local news picked up the story. A reporter came to interview her at the restaurant, and Antonio let them film while Rachel played the piano they'd kept after the party. He'd decided to make it a permanent feature, live music on weekend nights, and Rachel would be the first regular performer. Her old conservatory called with an offer she never expected. They wanted her to join the faculty as an artist in residence. She'd teach a few classes, give master classes, and have time to practice and perform. It came with a real salary, benefits, and access to their practice rooms with their incredible pianos. We should have done more to support our graduates, the dean told her during their meeting. Your story opened our eyes. We're changing our program to better prepare students for the realities of building a music career, and we'd be honored if you'd help us do that. Rachel accepted. But the offer that surprised her most came from a concert hall across the country. They wanted her to perform a full recital, a real concert with tickets sold and everything, the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed about for years and thought would never come. The demand is there, the booking manager explained. People want to see you play in person. They've watched the video, but they want the real experience. We think we can sell out a 500-seat venue easily. Rachel's hands shook as she agreed. A 500-seat venue. Her name on a concert poster. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed about, suddenly within reach. 3 months after that night at the restaurant, Rachel gave her final shift. Antonio threw a party for her, and this time Rachel played for everyone. Her co-workers, the regulars who'd been coming to the restaurant for years, even some of the kitchen staff who normally never came out front. They all gathered around while she performed. When she finished, Antonio handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for far more than her final paycheck should have been. Consider it back pay, he said with a grin, for all the talent I didn't know I had working for me. Rachel hugged him, crying for what felt like the 100th time in 3 months. "Thank you for giving me a chance that night. For letting me play." "You gave yourself that chance," Antonio corrected. "You raised your hand. You sat down at that piano. I just didn't stop you." The documentary premiered 6 months later. Rachel watched it with a room full of people who'd been part of her journey. Friends, family, former teachers, even Vincent and some of her old co-workers from the restaurant. Seeing her story on screen, hearing herself talk about the struggles and the hope and the moment everything changed, it felt unreal. But the most unreal moment came 3 days after the documentary aired. Rachel's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a voice on the other end introduced himself as a representative from one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. They wanted to book her for their Emerging Artists series. A performance that would be recorded and broadcast. The kind of opportunity that launched careers. Rachel said yes before he'd even finished explaining the details. Her first major concert was on a Tuesday night in November, almost exactly 1 year after that evening at the restaurant. Rachel stood backstage wearing an elegant black dress that was worlds away from her old server uniform. She could hear the audience filing in, the murmur of hundreds of voices, the rustling of programs. She was terrified, but it was a different kind of fear than she'd felt before. Not the fear of failure or humiliation, just the natural nervousness that comes before doing something important, something real. A stagehand gave her the signal. Rachel walked out onto the stage and the applause washed over her. 500 people all there to hear her play. She sat down at the beautiful grand piano, so similar to the one that had started everything. And just like that night at the restaurant, the moment her fingers touched the keys, everything else fell away. She played for 90 minutes. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, pieces she'd loved for years and some she'd only recently learned. Every note was for the girl who'd practiced in tiny conservatory rooms dreaming of moments like this. Every phrase was for the exhausted waitress who'd come home too tired to play but played anyway. Every crescendo was for anyone who'd ever felt invisible, like their gifts didn't matter. The audience gave her 3 standing ovations. 3. She played 2 encores and could have played a third if her hands hadn't been shaking so badly. Backstage afterward, Rachel checked her phone. The video from last year, the one that started everything, had been shared again, people posting it with captions about not giving up, about unexpected moments, about dreams that don't die even when you think they have. It had 15 million views now. But the number didn't matter as much as it once would have. Because Rachel had learned something over the past year. The views, the viral moment, the documentary, they'd all opened doors. But the music itself that had been there all along, in her fingers, in her heart, waiting. She thought about her tiny apartment, her old upright piano, all those nights she'd come home from the restaurant too tired to practice, but had sat down and played anyway. Those moments hadn't been wasted. They'd been keeping her alive, keeping her ready for when the opportunity finally came. Antonio's restaurant still had the piano in the corner. They'd put up a small plaque next to it that read, "Where dreams take flight." Rachel visited sometimes, always on the anniversary of that special night. She'd sit at that same piano and play for whoever was there. Sometimes it was a full house of people who'd come specifically to see her. Sometimes it was just a handful of diners who had no idea who she was. It didn't matter. She played anyway. Because that's what musicians do, they play. Not for fame or recognition or viral videos, though those things are nice when they come. They play because the music needs to come out. Because staying silent would be worse than any rejection or failure. Rachel had learned that the hard way. And now, every time she sat down at a piano, whether it was in a concert hall or a restaurant or her own apartment, she remembered that lesson. The music had always been there. She just needed to be brave enough to let it out.